Hey, this is David Wolinsky back with another interview from the audio archives of NoDon'tDie.com. This time I'm bringing to you a conversation I had with Lauren Tozer-Kilts, who's an ex-Nintendo gameplay counselor. We spoke on August 13th, 2015. If you want to read a full transcript of our conversation, you can check the link in the description below. And also below, you'll see a link to my Patreon, which if you can throw some money my way, if you like this work that I'm doing, would go a long way. Thanks.
Okay, my name is Lauren Tozer-Kilts, 48 years old. Yes, that's correct. Birthday is approaching, so I had to do some math.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Name, age, serial number. What else? What?
Warranty. How did you come to lose interest?
Oh, right. Okay. It was kind of a slow process. Because back, 20 some odd years ago, and this is going to tie back into a little bit about Nintendo as well. But when I first started at Nintendo, I was a gameplay counselor, and which meant since that position no longer exists, it's probably best to describe that a little bit. Back before the internet, if you needed help with a game, they would call a number at Nintendo, and there was a staff of people who knew the games, played the games, had access to a large database about the games and how to get through them. And so it was my job for quite a while to help people finish games. The interesting aspect of that, and this is a question that I got asked quite a bit at the time, was, well, why are you helping people play games? Isn't that kind of antithetical to selling more games? And the truth back then was that if you finished a game, you'd want a new game to play. And so we helped people reduce the frustration about getting through a particular thing so that they would still be excited, go out and buy another game, and, continue the cycle.
Now, I'm trying to remember, were those toll-free calls, or at some point were they paid calls, or?
Well, at the first year or so, and this is before I started working there, it was an 800 number, but that got to be too expensive. So it was changed to just a regular long-distance call. In other words, we weren't charging for it.
Yeah.
And so basically, if you wanted to pay the long-distance charge to call Redmond, Washington, then, that's all that was required. Then toward the end, even then that was getting a little expensive because of staffing costs. And we did switch to a 900 number. But that was about the time I was starting to get out of gameplay counseling and doing other jobs within the consumer service department, including writing for that database that other gameplay counselors were using. So it would be my job to sit, play a game, occasionally take phone calls, but play the game, write up how to get all the way through a particular game. And then that transitioned into answering letters and emails, which eventually somehow transitioned into technical writing in a completely different department. And so I spent 8 years in the customer service department associated with, in some way, helping people play video games, and then another 14 years in the department that was responsible for repairs. So I was writing the repair manuals that were used in North America and Europe to repair the product.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was somewhere in that transition between doing it as a job and then not doing it as a job, but doing a very mentally taxing, difficult job, that coming home after work, video games just weren't necessarily that appealing. I still played, we started playing MMOs, my wife and I, quite a bit, somewhere in that time frame. Couldn't tell you exactly when. Look up EverQuest and that'll give you kind of a guide on that.
Yeah.
We weren't, the first people into EverQuest, but I think it had been out for less than 6 months by when we started. I don't remember.
That's okay.
Long time ago, galaxy far, far away. But so since that was an activity that the two of us were doing together, that still kept me into, I would guess you would call video games. But the platforming experience and the solo video game experience really just started not being as much fun. I would occasionally dig back into strategy turn-based games because, those are easier to pick up and set down without having to invest a lot of time into. I continued on doing things like Civilization and the like, but even then, it just the amount of time needed to do anything, and there were just so many other things that we wanted to do that even MMOs just like, they're fun, they're great to do in the winter time, but if you only do them in the wintertime, you kind of get left behind. So,
in what way?
Oh, if you're with a guild and you're doing a bunch of adventuring with them, if you say, okay, it's motorcycle riding season, and you're gone for 6 months, there are new raids, there are new things out there, and so you're just not as powerful. And a lot of the guilds out there just aren't willing to help you get caught up because, well, you weren't there to gut it out, and so it just becomes less fun.
Yeah. Do you feel like you were mourning the loss of anything by opting instead for, like, say, if it is motorcycle season, to go do that instead of level grinding or I know those games are more than that, so I'm not saying.
No,
I'd understand there's like social connections people have and camaraderie, but I mean, do you feel like you are mourning the loss of anything by opting instead for different activities?
At first, I thought. Well, at first I kind of was mourning the social aspect, but as soon as the social aspect sort of got separated from the game, the grinding aspect of it really leaped to the fore, and it's like, oh my god, do not want to grind. Grinding is to suck. So, MMOs are wonderful social constructs, but when that's taken away and you're just left with the grind, then it is zero fun. We stuck with Lord of the Rings Online for quite a while because the storytelling within that game was really, really good. However, they're kind of winding down the storylines now, and they're just setting up a bunch of these grind-tastic events, and, well, that's no fun.
Yeah.
So, I haven't played Lord of the Rings in probably, I don't know, 6 or 9 months. And even when I did play before that, it was only for... I would go through cycles with that game of 2 weeks to get through the new storyline content, then hit that grind roadblock and or lack of guild to make raiding fun. And so it'd be 2 or 3 weeks where it's interesting, and then give it up for 9 months or a year until the next big patch came out, go through that bit of story, and then leave it alone again. And and it's probably been over a year since I've even logged in.
Now, I always love when people talk about this in these. You you said before the internet, as if it was so long ago. I'm curious, like, how do you feel that, like, because you have a really unique perspective on this, since like it was your job to talk to people who played games before the internet.
Well, before the web. Let's be more precise about that.
Yes. Sorry. No, I mean,
no, I'm
you
the
are
one
correct.
who used the internet first, but
That's no, but I understand the distinction. But I guess for people reading this who may not know, and do think we both sound very old, we are not. But what is that distinction there?
Well, of course, the internet was invented back in, oh man, my history is killing me. Sometime in the late 50s or early 60s, it was Defense Department trying to connect computers to continue doing research. And
ARPANET.
Huh? Yeah, DARPANET.
ARPANET. Yeah.
And then the universities kind of took over that because they found it to be very, very useful. And then there was a period of time, and it, for those not familiar with the internet before the web, you had to physically know the address of servers, have access to those servers, and so there wasn't necessarily a big free-flowing pool of information like there is on the web. It was very segmented. The internet, if you weren't part of a college or whatever, you were kind of limited to email, and then brain freezing.
Bulletin boards?
Bulletin boards, and I'm also trying to think of not IRC, but these little communities that were just sort of tucked into weird corners of the internet. And there was a name for that type of community, and I forget what it is off the top of my head because I'm being forgetful right now.
That's okay. I mean, when I send you the transcript, we can Google and insert it, and you can look like you remembered it instantly, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that, because I'm not remembering it either. But continue. Go ahead.
But again, there wasn't easy access to information. There wasn't. This also was before search engines, so you couldn't exactly go to, well, as we just said, Google, and say Zelda level 2. You had to know where the Zelda community was, and then there might be an answer, or maybe not. But even then, it was more discussion-based stuff, and so there just, again, weren't these wads of information that you could just go and get. And then the web sort of started transforming that as people started setting up their own websites and whatever and become repositories for that kind of information. And then, but then that you still kind of had to know where to find it. You had to know the address, or know where there was a link to that particular thing. And then the search engines came and changed all that yet again, so that you could just literally type in a question and then be given a list of places to find that information. And it was that part of the evolution of the World Wide Web, the search engines, That's what really came in and killed off the need for the gameplay counselor, because you no longer had to know where stuff was. You could go to the search engine and it would tell you where the stuff was.
So you worked at Nintendo for 22 plus years. Last 13.
1991 to 2014. So 22 and a half years, yeah.
Okay, yeah, you said 22 plus. You said the last 13 were being technical writers. So I'm trying to do the math. How long were you a gameplay counselor then? That would have been about 7, 8 years?
Yeah, eight-ish years. And my job title did evolve in that 8 years. Because as I mentioned, I started doing other things in addition to the gameplay counseling.
So that's part of Nintendo proper.
Yes.
So, what do you remember about that time? Like, I'm curious also, like, you know, what was the office like, and how big was the team, and the stuff that happened day to day outside of your work. What do you remember about that time?
Well, let's see here. Nintendo still is a big company, and generates billions of dollars in revenue. But remarkably, there's only about 5,000 people worldwide. And if compare that to, say, Xbox, where there's 5,000 people in Redmond alone.
Yeah.
Okay? So the call center had about, with seasonal fluctuations, because we need more people in the winter, but there were, I believe, about 150 full-time people in the call center, split between regular consumer service duties and gameplay counseling duties. I believe the split was something like 60-40, with 40% being gameplay counselor. You can quote me on that, but I'm not standing by that number as being correct.
About is what I'm assuming anyway. Yeah. So what were kids like in those days? Because I usually ask, like, what do you remember about, you know, people who play games before last year, and most people don't even remember 2010. But you had a lot of conversations over a lot of years. A lot
of conversations over a lot of years. My combined consumer service contact and gameplay counseling contacts were over 150,000 contacts.
You mean individual?
Yes.
People that you interfaced with to talk about video games?
Yeah, I'm certain that I talked to a couple people more than once, but individual, logged, so that's a lot of phone calls.
It's more than 6, yeah.
It's more than 6. So, yeah.
By way of contrast, this is about the 90th of these interviews that I've done. So I will defer to your expertise here.
But
you've got at least more than 6 than I have done. Yeah.
So yeah, 150,000 contacts with consumers.
Holy crap.
Now the thing is that at the beginning of that, there was more people who were excited about talking to us, talking about the games, and getting help, and we're thankful for that help. Then toward the end of my tenure there, it became more assumed and expected. And the philosophy of how we answered questions changed too, because in the first few years it was, don't give the answer, but give a hint. Help them figure it out. But towards the end it was, I need to know precisely how to do X, Y, or Z, how to find the chest that contains the hook shot in a Zelda game, for example. And so in the beginning, it would be like, well, let me remind you about this clue or that clue in the game. And they would go, oh, yeah. And toward the end of my tenure there, if I tried that, they would go, just give me the frickin' answer. And okay, go left 2 screens, up 1 screen, knock on the door 3 times, whatever.
And I assume you had to sort of overhaul or revamp your database accordingly?
Well, the thing is that in those 8 years, many, many games came out. And so where the information was more tailored to giving hints, perhaps in the beginning of those 8 years, those games weren't getting played, or we weren't getting questions about them towards the end. So it was just sort of a natural evolution. Okay, now we need to start writing. We called them
you called them what?
Quick plays.
Okay.
So, a quick play about Zelda looked somewhat different toward the end of the 8 years than it did at the beginning.
What do you think changed? I mean, obviously games became more popular, but there's a attitude shift.
There is an attitude shift, and I'm not sure. Well, part of the attitude shift comes when we switched to the 900 number. We were now actively digging into their pocket for that for money for that information. Okay, so I can really empathize with the people who wanted to get on the phone, get their answer, and get off.
Yeah.
All right. So spending time on the phone was just not something that they wanted to do, and I totally get that. So I'm not sure if there was a change in the gaming community so much as because of the way the contact had to be made, there's a different perception about what we owed them when the contact was made.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, did you ever, did any of your colleagues, did they get abusive, or would they be rude, or?
Even in the beginning, there was always going to be someone who was going to be rude and obnoxious and whatever.
Well, what was like rude and obnoxious in the 90s? Like, it's probably different from today, right?
I'm not so certain about that.
Yeah.
Because you keep saying the kids. Well,
yeah.
Even back in the beginning, I would have to say that 40% of our contacts, again, kind of making that number up, but
sure,
I'm getting the feeling, were adults.
And they'd also be rude or obnoxious?
They're the ones who tended to be rude and obnoxious.
Okay. This actually makes sense, though, for some reason.
Generally speaking, the grannies were great. The kids were great. It was the teenagers and young adults that were always the worst to deal with.
How so?
Not
to fixate on it, but that's probably the last I'll ask about it. But no, it's interesting to hear about.
I guess there was, right, as you're a young adult or late teen, you have a certain sense of your place in the world and perhaps growing entitlement. I hate using that word here, but I think it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
You're more goal focused perhaps than the kid or the granny. I love talking to the self-admitted grandmothers who are playing games, because they were there for fun.
Well, I mean, I even remember like in Nintendo Power, I think back then that there would be profiles of like this grandma had the best time, meaning she beat in the fastest time, like Legend of Zelda or something.
Yeah.
But it was always treated as like, isn't that interesting? But from what you're saying, that was actually fairly common. Or at least not that much, not that unusual.
It wasn't rare.
Yeah.
They certainly weren't the largest percentage of callers, but just 2 or 3 times a week, I'd get the granny call, and those were wonderful.
Yeah. Well, what made them so especially enjoyable?
I think it's because they had fewer expectations about completing the game, and just they were more the young kids and the older players were more in it for fun. And somehow, I would have to say there's more, even though the late teens, early adults were playing for fun, there's more of a competitive, I have to complete this. I have to find everything. I have to, as opposed to, like, wasn't it great, playing through that level? That was a fun level, whatever. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, do you think, is there any sort of line or comparison you can draw with your huge sample pool of people you've talked to, like, from, when you started to the entitlement that exists around games today? Like, does it seem like a straight line? Does it seem pretty much the same thing? Just people are more able to find each other now because of the internet, and it seems more intense? Or, like, what are the lines you can draw?
That becomes increasingly difficult for me to draw any kind of straight lines. Because as I got separated from doing it as a job to doing something else, my interaction with the larger community of gamers also diminished. And so my only real connection with community might be through guilds and MMOs, and even then that's somewhat sporadic. And so I become more isolated from the larger gaming community in general, and just going back to what I want in a game now is radically different than what I wanted in a game, 10 or 20 years ago. Because the way my life has evolved, there's just the story for Mass Effect sounds interesting. I just do not have the time to have to play all the battle scenarios to get to the story.
I mean, you had mentioned in our email thread that you've changed and grown a lot in your life, and that was part of putting down video games. I'd be interested to hear in your words, and this does come up in other interviews, but for people who don't have a context for video games, like, why can they be so incompatible with, like, having relationships in your life?
Well, time. The games have gotten more complex, which is good in a way. It means the art form is evolving. People are putting more thought into it. But it also means, because of that level of complexity, you have to invest more time into it. And good relationships, require you investing time with that person in that relationship. Okay? Now, I sort of have it lucky, because she's a gamer too, as I mentioned. And so there is a certain amount of gaming that we can do together as a family that's investing time in that relationship. And working together in MMOs was certainly part of that. Or board gaming, where we can, especially cooperative board gaming, we've become particularly fond of that in recent years. But competitive gaming, like fighting games, neither of us have been particularly interested in that. And the single-player experience, say playing a Zelda, that's stepping away from cooperative time. If I want to play a Zelda game now, I have to say, well, I need to forego this other activity, and separate myself into the Zelda bubble, play Zelda for a while, and I'm less interested in that time away from the relationship, especially when we can. There's so many things that do invest in the relationship, like going on motorcycle rides together, or taking a photo safari together, or any number of things.
Yeah. Well, so what made you want to work for Nintendo in the first place?
I needed a job. I was in college. They hired me.
That's a good reason. Well,
it doesn't really get any simpler than that.
No, I understand. Yeah.
No, it was. In college, it's like, crap, I need a part-time job. There's this company that I've only vaguely heard of called Nintendo, and they're hiring part-time people to work on the phones. And that doesn't sound particularly interesting, but the pay seems to be okay for a part-time position. Let's go apply. Oh, I got the job. Okay. Hey, this gameplay counseling stuff is kind of fun. 20 years later.
Yeah. That's what, yeah.
So I completely blundered into the job.
Well, so probably not in the very beginning. I'm curious, like, what were you thinking it would be a path to? And so if that was your circumstances, I'm sure at some point, it coalesced into your head where, oh, okay, I could see this, maybe I could do this from here, or maybe do that from here.
Yeah, exactly. What
were you thinking it might be a path to once you got to that point of being acclimated and really liking it?
That's a little bit more difficult to... there's a lot of stuff that goes on in a company like that. And in most companies, I've come to learn by talking to people outside of Nintendo, a lot of stuff is highly specialized, where at Nintendo, there was a lot of need for flexibility since the company is a big company with a very small population. And so it wouldn't be unusual for, during the summer, it's like, okay, we don't need nearly this many number of people on the phone. We're going to farm them out to different departments who do need help at this time. So, I spent some time in game testing, which I hated. I spent some time doing grunt work for the advertising people. I spent some time hither, thither, and yon. And but when I would come back to the call center, it'd be like, okay, they have this structure of advancement and promotion. So I would work on that stuff because it was a fairly clearly defined structure of advancement. And that kind of came to an end when I was sent on a, quote, 6-month project, unquote, to help out the technical services department with some documentation. And as that project was coming to an end, it's like, God, there is a lot more stuff that needs to be done. I talked to the manager there and so like, what would you think about extending this project? Because, X, Y, and Z, and this is likely to be ongoing. And he said, yeah, that's probably true. Well, let me think about it. And about 2 weeks later, he said, congratulations, your new job title is technical writer. What? How about...
So what is that? What is that actually?
Well, yeah, exactly. And so I actually had to do a bunch of self-education to find out what a technical writer actually does. And that took me about 2 years to figure out properly what a technical writer did through educating myself.
What does a technical writer do? Very briefly. I don't have 2
In
years.
the circumstances that I was working in, and this can vary from job to job, but basically I was translating engineer into English.
Yes.
And so that I could create a clear set of instructions for a repair technician saying, okay, first remove the Fram widget, then remove the left-handed prawn flange, stuff like that.
Yeah, IKEA stuff.
Well, a bit more complex because for our IKEA stuff, if there's like 8 steps to removing the left-handed prawn flange, all those would be clear spelled out. But an educated technician, it's like, oh yeah, I was taught how to remove left-handed prawn flanges in school, so I didn't need to tell them how to do it. But they needed to know the order because one was on top of the other or whatever.
So, what were the perks like at Nintendo? Like, not necessarily just the monetary stuff, but like, what were the really nice things you enjoyed about being there?
For the first 18 or so years, there was a very high value on the individual performing and stepping out and working there. And so there was the intangible, like, oh, we noticed and that you were, stepping up here, there, and so there was a good bonus structure around that. The health benefits were pretty good for most of the time I was there. Decent 401k, decent retirement program. Unfortunately, I got grandfathered into that. So even when I got laid off a year ago, I'd been there for so long that even though I'm not anywhere near retirement age, guess what? I'm drawing a pension now.
Oh, congratulations.
So, I mean, it's not a lot of money, but it means that between my wife working full-time and this pension that I'm getting, I don't necessarily have to work. Although I do like to work, and so I'm doing part-time stuff, intermittently. Just being stuck in the house all the time is hard.
I'm freelance.
So you know what I'm talking about.
I'm well acquainted for a couple of years. Yeah, that's all. I mean, I'm in the media, and there's been some disruptions there as well. I mean, it's interesting because the internet, in a way, also sort of messed up what you do. Or at least what you had done.
What I had done, yeah. Dealing with the proprietary stuff on the technical writer side of things, that's all proprietary, and so there was
less so there.
So not so much there. It was just I'm gonna have to not talk about those reasons because there's still some bad feelings there on my part, and B, there is proprietary knowledge there that I really can't get into because proprietary.
Okay. I understand. It's not the first time that's come up in one of these conversations. For what it is worth, if you want to email someone who knows what it's like adjusting to that lifestyle or whatever with freelance stuff or with self-employed stuff or whatever, my door is open. I'm working on another project that is entirely about that, just a story in and of itself. But I understand. So this may be a weird question, but you did talk to like 150,000 people.
Over 150,000 people. Yes.
Over more than.
Yes, and that does not include the letters or emails.
What is the view of humanity that you get through that lens? Like, what is what's the picture that paints?
10% of the people are jerks, complete and outright, jerks. I could use, more harsh language, but, they could learn from Will Wheaton's Don't Be a Dick, and let's just leave it at that. 15% of the people are just outright stupid. Mm. And the worst callers are, of course, the stupid jerks. If we're doing a Venn diagram.
Yeah. I have a feeling by the time you get to 100% here, this will be, it'll look a little bit like the Olympic rings. There will be some overlap with all of the groups.
Yeah.
So about 10% are jerks. You said like 15 are stupid.
Outright stupid.
Okay. So you got 75% here now, I think.
Yeah.
I just showed it. Yeah.
About 50% of humanity is relatively reasonable. Even if they come onto the phone angry, as soon as you understand the basis of their anger and remove that, then life is wonderful for them. So a large chunk of humanity is actually relatively decent people. They've been, as I said, sometimes angered in some way, and if you can remove that source of irritation, then life is golden. Because I cannot tell you how many times, and this is a quote, "You have ruined my child's Christmas." I've heard that, and then, 10 or 15 minutes later, when I've sorted out the problem, it's like, oh my God, you have just saved Christmas. That's going from zero to hero in ways that, it's hard to describe.
But what do you think, obviously, internet and people can intersect with each other just whenever they feel like it or try to. Which of those statements carries more emotional weight to receive? And maybe that's a subjective thing, but
I'm actually not sure I understand the question.
Well, in other words, being told you're a hero, does that stay with you more, or you have destroyed my child's life?
You have ruined my child's Christmas.
Sorry, I mean it's not funny, but yeah.
This is actually very interesting. I am one of those people that I let a lot of stuff roll off my back. But I've seen that kind of battering really wear at some people. And they're usually short-lived in the consumer service environment, where they take all that negative stuff to heart, and it kind of can ruin some people, which is sad. Mm-hmm. And so it's more about my personality persevering and seeing all the good that I did, and someone else who has a completely different attitude, just letting it get to them. Where of that overlap of stupid and angry, of people who just don't want to be helped. And so no matter what you do for them, it's never going to be enough. And it's those calls that some people find most destroying.